Alright, so the first YCS under the new ban list just concluded and we have to talk about it. Did the hits actually have an impact, or is Snake Eyes still way too dominant? Do Colossus and Protoss actually matter? We'll be answering all of these questions and more in today's tournament report, so stick around, like the video, make sure you comment as well, and let's go ahead and get straight into it. So let's start things off by going over the top cut breakdown, and what I figured would be fun to do is I want to compare top tables from the first chart I could find, which was round 5, to then the eventual top 32, and we can talk about some of the conversion rates and which decks actually saw play during the tournament but didn't top, and then we'll move on, of course, to top 16, top 8, top 4, and the eventual winner. So with this round 5 breakdown, some of the decks that stand out to me the most would be Sprite Tri-Brigade, Marincess, Mikanko, Thunder Dragon Despia Branded, Adventurer Kashtira Horus, and also Hero. For the most part, the other decks in this chart that are also the most highly represented are the ones that did manage to make all the way to top 32, and the ones I just mentioned unfortunately didn't. But still, I figured it's cool to just talk about a lot of diversity in this format where people just don't really feel like they want to play, the top deck, the tier 0 deck, or however you want to call it. What you can do is make some of these other decks work specifically by utilizing some of the weaknesses of the top decks. And one of the most interesting decks doing that pretty much is the Adventurer Kashtira Horus deck, which we actually saw during the tournament. And what the player said was that he basically utilizes going second, board breakers, and just the sheer power and ability of his deck to go second to go through all of these fire decks against which he lost most of the die rolls and went second anyway, so then he was just able to get the win from there. And like we said, unfortunately this deck didn't top, but there's still some innovation to be done, especially in a new format. The sad thing though is the fact that no Colossus topped, so there is innovation there, like with Thunder Dragon Despia Branded, but unfortunately Colossus did not make it. Neither did Protoss, so none of these cards that we felt like could be an issue and, kind of a problem floodgate to come back, none of them topped. And this is only the first event, and of course this is no Legacy of Destruction format. Things are going to change again post that set, but still, I feel like this means something. It is not that easy to utilize cards that can be outed, because we saw Colossus on the feature match, and one time it was outed with SP and the other time was with Sky Crisis. So there are multiple different ways of dealing with this card, and that's just the reality of things. I do want to say how much I love the SP Thunder Dragon combo, I guess, by banishing a Thunder Dragon Dark, for example, when you summon SP to be able to get the effect. I thought that was really, really cool. And obviously you can utilize Bistios to do the same thing, but SP is just so generic, and I kind of really like this. So I guess some other decks, noteworthy decks, would be Mikanko, Marincess, and Sprite Tri-Brigade. Like they're doing well at like a regional level, for example. They are not terrible decks, but it also does make sense that they are not the ones topping, even though they are still nice. It is a YCS after all. So with that, let's move on to top 32, and it's still a major representation of Snake Eye. Look, this pie chart of course differentiated pure Snake Eye from Kashtira Snake Eye, Fire King Snake Eye, but it's all Snake Eye at the end of the day, which is like around 65% or something like that, 30, 40, 50, yeah, almost like around 60% of the field. So still, Snake Eye is the dominant deck, which we figured is going to happen, but I do simply adore the deviation from the basic Snake Eye stuff with Kashtira Snake Eye, as well as Scareclaw Snake Eye, which is also a thing, and Fire King Snake Eye was a thing before. The only thing that's a little surprising to me is the fact that we kind of figured Fire King Snake Eye is going to be the dominant deck moving forward and the deck to beat. But what I figure happened is that people know this deck can be outed much more easily than pure Snake Eye. So players decided to try to make the pure variant work, which is still a little tougher to side against and doesn't lose to some of the blowout cards like Fire King would. So I think that's really cool. It's really interesting. I do like the Kashtira version a lot. And yeah, I guess let's talk about some other decks as well. What I wanted to, I guess, focus on with this little segment in the video is, how do you guys feel about deck out as a win condition? I really want to know, because we saw Runic Stun and 3 of them made it to top cut. And I just really want to know how you feel about that. I think it just tilts me when I see a player get deck outed, or if I get deck outed playing against Runic. I just think it's kind of terrible. So let me know what you think about that. Is this a win condition that should be respected, that should be part of this game? Or do you feel like Runic is kind of past, due to be addressed? I really want to know your thoughts, but I think this stun strategy is the necessary evil we have in today's format, and I totally understand why some players pick it up. It makes sense. The deck is good. It is not just this, funny one-time thing you encounter at a tournament. It's an actual viable deck. And I'm not sure this is the greatest thing to have in the format, but again, it is necessary evil. So let's move on to some other decks. Voiceless Voice, it's performing. It is fine. Not the highest representation. Voiceless Voice was represented at about 20% post round 5, and those are this is a representation of top tables, so supposedly the best players in the room at that point. So 20% going all the way down to only 6%. So this is 2 Voiceless Voice topping pretty much, which is still fine, but we do know that this deck has some issues, mainly with bricking, and it can be outed fairly easily. I feel like just fire decks have a really good matchup against that deck, at least I've always felt that way. And yeah, another thing I want to talk about is Despia branded. There's Bistio versions, Despia versions, it's just all branded at the end of the day, but I do want to check out the conversion rate, which I guess it's very similar. I feel like we saw a lot of branded, and only one of them made it top 32, and the other one is Bistio branded, so I guess 2 of them. How do you feel about branded in this format? Because a lot of really good players seem to have picked up this deck for the event, and I think this is kind of nice. A lot of times people are going to deviate from hand traps with some of the versions of the decks they are building, like we talked about before, because with hand traps, you kind of have to stop the deck in its tracks. You really have to know when to interrupt the opponent, but with some of the blowout cards, you kind of just, mow through the entire field pretty much. And when you encounter a deck with Despia that doesn't have any hand traps, you're feeling really good. Your brand diffusion is resolving, your entire combo is going through, your gimmick puppet locking your opponent. So it's kind of surprising to me that only 2 players managed to top. There is a fairly decent amount of, diversity in this top 32 still, but, only 2 branded, I'm a little surprised about that. So let me know what you think. I guess there's also the possibility of players being very well prepared for Despia, because even if your main deck maybe is not that great against the deck, you are definitely siding against it. So I feel like we may have found ourselves in a predicament, or the Despia players may have found themselves in the predicament of a lot of players just know what their strategy does and they are prepared for it, they're gonna counter it, so the deck is going to fall off at least a little bit. This might be the case as well. So let's move on. Kashtira, Flunder, these kinds of decks, it makes sense that there's always this one player topping with either of these decks. Labyrinth is really cool to see. I always hype this deck up a lot. Pearly is really nice, especially with, getting more copies of Delicious Memory. That's amazing. Or 1 more copy. And there's also the Runic Plunder Patrol build. So this one hyped me up the most when I saw this breakdown. It's just amazing to see Runic Plunder Patrol do well. I love Runic as an engine, but when it's not used for evil. So next up, we have the top 16 breakdown as well as top 8. So in top 16, we see a more dominant amount, basically, of Kashtira Snake Eye, whereas before Pure Snake Eye had the upper hand, I guess, but it doesn't really matter because the percentages are not, all of them is Snake Eyes. Just like I said before, I do really like the version of Kashtira, as I've mentioned already, but still we just see a lot of Snake Eye variants. And then the other decks are just Dispia branded, Plunder Patrol, Labyrinth, Runic, Bistio branded, and Flunder. So I guess the Runic Plunder Patrol is the version that again sticks out the most. It managed to go all the way to top 16, but that's where its path stopped. Maybe we could say inevitably. I don't know how many people believed Plunder is going to, take it all the way, but it would be amazing to see. So let's move on to top 8. Here we have 3 Snake Eye, 2 Kashtira Snake Eye, 1 Dispia branded, 1 Labyrinth, and 1 Fire King Snake Eye. Unfortunately, that's where the tournament stopped for Dispia branded. It got knocked out by Kashtira Snake Eye. But still, it's a nice representation for this deck that does seem to be a really good counter against all of these fire decks. But then we have top 4 where, it's mostly just Snake Eye decks. But Labyrinth is the one that's the most interesting. Also because, out of all the decks that could be there in top 4, alongside all the fire ones, I don't think Labyrinth was the most expected variant. But I always talk about this deck, just about how nice it is when you really build it to perfection. When you think about how you're going to counter the meta and just use all of this knowledge, to make the perfect Labyrinth build. I genuinely believe this deck is really, really cool. And it was just such a hype moment to see it go so far in the event, especially because it doesn't have a lot of tops and just great accomplishments in recent months. And we all kind of felt like it fell off in the new format, once Fire really started to dominate. But still, getting a finals finish is still incredible. And even though it got second place, not won the YCS, it is still an incredible accomplishment. Now, we still need to keep in mind that yes, the answer to the question whether or not Snake Eyes dominated is a definitive yes. I'm not sure how much impact this ban list actually had, but at least there's some more innovation when it comes to all of these Snake Eyes variants. This is not to knock any of the players playing Snake Eyes, but saying it doesn't really matter which version it is just to say that the engine is extremely, extremely dominant, and that's what we're going to be, I guess, facing in the new format. However, all of these 3 variants that made it all the way to top 4 are really, really strong in their own right. And it was just so nice to see a lot of good fire gameplay, because even if you don't really like the fire decks, if you don't vibe with the entire tier 0 Snake Eye format, it's still very interactive once you get going, once there's actually turns 3 and 4, etc. So I personally liked to see some of these mirror matches, again, when there wasn't a single hand trap completely cutting off the other player, which does happen time to time. So that's the negative part of this format, but still, we kind of expected Snake Eye to take down the entire event. But which version do you feel like is the best one right now? Because all of them have their strengths and weaknesses, but there's a lot of innovation still to be done, in my opinion. Just now we saw different versions pop up, and I do have a feeling people are going to innovate even further. So it's going to be interesting to see how the format shifts, especially post Legacy of Destruction. And there's decks like Yubel and just random contenders trickling into the format, and I think it's going to be really, really cool. I still really enjoyed watching this event, and let me know your thoughts about the entire thing. Some other noteworthy things when it comes to this tournament, I really love that they had a feature match of the side station. I think that's actually awesome. Sorry, I have to move my cable. I think that's actually awesome. I really, really love this. It's it gives us something to do when we're waiting for the rounds, and when you get to watch more Yu-Gi-Oh, I think that's really cool. Another thing, they had a Time Wizard event, which was, I believe, 8 rounds of Swiss. So that's a big tournament for Edison, and I think that is amazing. I always say this, give more love to Edison and other Time Wizard events. They deserve it. So I think that's nice. And to round the video off, some noteworthy cards I wanted to talk about. We saw quite a lot of Lullaby of Obedience seeing play in all of these Snake Eye mirror matches and hand traps just overall. I talked about some of the more board breakers and board break approaches rather in this video, but still there are some really good hand traps right now, mainly Nibiru with all of these Omni negates gone and, you know, just targeting negation hand traps. Also Sauravis to dodge targeting negation, not just in Voiceless Voice, which is really cool. I wanted to talk about Tyrant's Tirade and Cursed Seal of the Forbidden Spell, and of course Synchrozone as well. But Synchrozone is the one that was, I guess, the most played in these runic stun variants, but the two other cards, you know, took me by surprise. You know, I was like, okay, that's actually really cool. Like, again, I despise stun decks, but it's just interesting to see, because we have this entire pool of however many cards there have been printed at this point to utilize, and you see players just pick up some of these really old cards to put them in their strategies. I don't know, it's cool, but again, it's used for bad purposes. So we don't support that. And then I also wanted to talk about the Omega Dispater combo in the Snake Eye Pure builds. I think that's really cool. It's another way to utilize Synchros in this deck, and I do feel like they may have had to ban Jet Synchron to avoid things like that, but it's still cool to see. And I guess, yeah, that's pretty much going to be it. Hopefully you enjoyed this little report of what happened, and of course, like the video if you like me doing these types of stuff. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.